Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Vitamin C's, proudly part of the CLNS Media Network. As usual, I'm your boy Adam Taylor. It says right there on the hat with the NBA because that's my at. And I'm joined by my usual co-host, my partner in crime. I've completely messed that little bit of the intro up, but I'm joined by my boy Tim Sheils. What's popping, Tim?
Not much, man. Hey, how do I look? You like this? Like this new angle? I don't know if you can tell for anyone who's watching it, but I got a new webcam. I'm very excited about it. I got a
Yeah,
new
what'd you
light.
get?
So it's a Logitech like 1080p camera, so
It's the
a
same
little
one
bit
I
of an
use.
upgrade.
Same one
Yeah,
I use, bro.
I like it. Hey, it was on sale. I'm just getting a little shameless plug, but
So no
boosting the
one can
setup.
see
So
this, but I'm sitting on a new desk and it literally fills like a third of my office, if not more. I say an office, it's the smallest bedroom in the house. I turned it into an office.
yeah, same.
But it's like I've got like a huge wingspan, like huge, and the desk is literally tip to tip of my wingspan in an L shape. It's massive, man. So you can't see it, but it means I can sit like this, I can sit like this, I can sit like this. I just got I'm moving all the time, bro, just to try and get them calories up. Anyway, another guy that was moving all the time, just jumping straight into this one, was Jayson Tatum against the Charlotte Hornets in game 2. I know it was the third game against the Hornets. Don't come for me, but it was game 2 in that kind of little mini 2-game mini series against Charlotte. Dropped 51 points. Now, me and Tim were talking before we came on air. We decided we're going to stop talking. We're going to take this over and record it because it was a good conversation. So what we're looking at is what would Jayson Tatum need to do to surpass Larry Bird as, like, you know, the Celtic. When you're talking, and I know Bill Russell's in that conversation, Havlicek's in that conversation, and so forth. But when you speak to a casual NBA fan and you say Boston Celtics, they say Larry Bird. Depending on the rate, some might say Paul Pierce, but generally Larry Bird. So what would Tatum need to do to surpass Bird? Now, Tim, I know you've got Larry Bird's career achievements, as we'll call them, kind of just listed on your screen. I'm coming with some energy, so I want you to come back at me with some energy. But read these out, bro. Let me know.
Yeah. So, I think the biggest thing is going to be championships. Larry Bird, obviously, face of the franchise for years. When you put him up there, he's Mr. Celtic, basically. And the reason why we're even going into this is because after a 51-point performance against Charlotte, Jayson Tatum has broken another Larry Bird record. He is the most 50-point games by a Celtic. He's got 5, and he's tied Kobe Bryant for the most by a player under the age of 25 or before the age of 25 with 5 50-point performances. So just on the surface level, that's like a massive achievement. And I think the biggest thing that he needs to do is win championships. Larry Bird won 3 NBA championships, 2 finals MVPs, 3-time MVP for the regular season, 12-time All-Star, 9-time All-NBA first team, 3 times was the 3-point contest champion in consecutive years. Now, this is just on the surface level. And to be realistic here, like, I'm not asking him to go out and win 3-point contests. I could care. I
I
give.
care less, dude.
I couldn't care less about that. But I think it really does come down to titles. I think if Jayson Tatum were to go out and win MVP this year and the Celtics are back in the championship and they take it home, I think that rhetoric starts to get a little bit stronger. And granted, like, you know, you depending on who you talk to, that narrative is completely different, right? You talk to older generations, they're going to say Larry Bird. Talk to younger guys, ask someone, Boston Celtics, who comes to mind, and they're under the age of 25, they're probably going to say Jayson Tatum.
Yeah, and it's getting there, right? I mean, I think one of the things for me is, and one of the reasons I dislike this, how many rings has that guy got conversation in general is, it's very difficult to win an NBA championship, especially when you don't have the support around you. Like, unless you're, like, even LeBron James needed Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, needed Kevin Love, Kyrie Irving, goes to LA, needed Anthony Davis, and then a really strong supporting cast. So championships don't just grow on trees, and they definitely don't fall on one player's shoulders. And what I mean by that is, you could say Tatum needs to equal or surpass Bird's championships to be seen on the same level, but that's on Brad Stevens far more than it is on Jayson Tatum, because Stevens needs to make sure Tatum's got the supporting cast around him. Can they lock up Jaylen Brown for another contract? Can they keep him there? Can they figure a way to keep Grant Williams, to keep Robert Williams, to keep Marcus Smart? Can they keep this core there? As the older guys like Smart, who's like, 29, he'll be coming into his age 30 season next season. As these guys start to age, can Brad rebuild on the fly, keep Tatum there while they do that? It's very difficult to sit here and be like, Tatum needs to win 4, 5, 3, whatever championships to be on Larry Bird's level, when quite realistically, he doesn't have complete control of that. Now, if he has the supporting cast there and he has Jaylen Brown and whoever else is around him, then yeah, you need to go and do what you need to go and do. That's who you are. We're seeing that you're embracing that now. I think that he's looked unstoppable in the post recently. He's looked unstoppable once he gets his rhythm. And just to top it off, he's playing with an injured wrist for the second straight season. You know what I'm saying? So I do want to push back a little bit on it comes down to titles, because that doesn't necessarily reflect on you as much as it reflects on the front office. Now, Brad's done a great job to this point. I've got nothing but trust there. But I just wanted to kind of push back there because I feel like that's a really unfair thing to say. And we hear it said all the time.
Yeah, well, I think it does come down to that ring rhetoric. Like, that's what it is going to be to most people. I think when people talk about legacies, it almost always is like the rings conversation. And some of the greatest players in the sport never won a championship. And that goes for a lot of different sports. I mean, you look at the NFL, like Dan Marino, one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game, never won a championship. I mean, look at the NBA, Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter, like those guys didn't win titles. And two of the generational talents from, their era in the NBA. There's so many
Carmelo
players.
Anthony never won a championship.
Yeah, well, no, yeah, right, because he got to LA late.
He got
Yeah.
to LA the year later, and then it just fell
Yeah.
apart. Wheels fell off.
Yeah, and
But
that wasn't his fault, but
and then this is the thing, right? Like, I was thinking about this earlier today, and this is genuine. I was genuinely thinking about this. If you was going into the NBA today, what would you prefer, championships or legacy? Because I personally think you can separate the two. But I've gave you my reasoning why in terms of championships. Legacy for me is 99% or 97% of your career with one team. You become their scoring leader, their 3-point leader, their, depending on what position you play, rebounds or assists. And you start climbing those ladders on each of these statistical categories. You make the playoffs every year that you're there. You make deep runs every year that you're there. You win an MVP, maybe 2. You're an all-star all the way through your prime, and build that legacy. Now, to me, that's more of what this conversation is. What does Tatum need to do to surpass Bird's legacy in Boston? Now, obviously, Bird's got them 3 rings. Tatum might not get there. They might win this year and go on a heater for the next 2, 3, 4 seasons, and all of a sudden they're neck and neck. But if he doesn't win the rings, but he becomes the scoring leader, the 3-point leader, top 5 in assists, top 5 in rebounds, he's an all-star every year he's there. Say he gets 2 MVPs. Do we put him at least on the same level as Bird, or are we still kind of like, no, Bird won them rings, so Bird has to be that one step higher?
I think he's in the conversation now. Like, you think about all these performances we see from Tatum, and you hear that he breaks a franchise record. Like 90 to 95% of the time when he breaks a franchise record, Larry Bird is somehow tied to it. Like, even the most 30-point games by a duo with him and Jaylen Brown, it was him passing Kevin McHale and Larry Bird. Like, that's how significant Larry was to the franchise, and that's how good Jayson Tatum is. Like, it's not a conversation of like who's the greatest of all time or something like that. And like, that's when rings really get into it. But in terms of overall impact since he's come to Boston, it's been massive. So I think right now they're in the same airspace, because every single time we hear Jayson Tatum's name coming up talking about franchise records, he's either close to Larry Bird or just tied a record for Larry Bird or just past Larry Bird. Like, that's how good he is. He is without a doubt, I think, the best Celtics draft pick of the past 25 years. I mean, he's easily the best since Pierce, and he's probably the best player that they've drafted since Larry Bird. And I don't think that's a stretch of the imagination.
And he's 24 right now. So assuming that he stays relatively injury-free, assuming that which is a fair assumption at this point. He hasn't
Yeah.
reached his prime yet. He's still another 2, maybe 3 years out of his prime, which is a scary proposition in itself, right? How, and then assuming he stays in Boston until, you know, they decide to do what they did with Pierce and kind of just get what they can for an aging guy. Maybe they keep him there, assuming he stays in Boston until 34, right? So another decade of Jayson Tatum being the face of the franchise. You imagine what he's going to achieve in the next 10 years. Regardless, take rings out of the equation, just in terms of impacts within the franchise, you're probably looking at a scoring title, maybe 2. You're probably looking at an all-defensive team, multiple All-NBA teams, probably 9, 8, 9, 10 All-Star selections, 2 MVP runs, multiple finals appearances at a minimum. Like, to me, he's got the best opportunity out of anyone that's come since Bird to surpass Bird, and or at least end up as like a top 2 Celtic all time. I think he's going to surpass Paul Pierce in terms of that. I do think that 1 ring is like, Pierce is also someone that falls into this conversation, right? Like,
Yeah.
1 ring, but his impact was enormous. And the fact that they only won 1 championship came down to an inability to rebuild around him when he first came there. Then Danny Ainge gave them the pieces they need. Then health became an issue, and they kind of clung to that roster a year too long, right? And that comes onto the front office. But I think Paul Pierce, Tatum's probably already surpassing Pierce in terms of influence on the game, in terms of scoring ability, defensive ability, playmaking ability. I just think he's an overall better player at 24 than what Pierce was at 24. And if he continues this development, he might become the best Celtic since Larry Bird, if not of all time.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty incredible to be able to have that kind of conversation, honestly, because I don't think this isn't a stretch of the imagination. It's not just green goggles or something like that. Like, you look at the reputation that Tatum has developed since entering the league and the kind of respect that he's gotten from the pros, both past and present. Like, people see what he's able to do right now, and he has single-handedly put himself into that MVP conversation. And even when he has an off night now at this point, you know, he's dropping 20 points.
25,
Like, yeah,
20,
you know,
25.
he's like, he puts on his shoes when he gets out of bed, and like, that's it. He's just already got 20
An
points.
off night
Easy.
for Jayson Tatum at this point is 23, 6, and 4.
And
Like,
he
that's
might pass
an
that.
off night.
He might pass that points per game record that Larry had set before. Larry had set it, and then Isaiah had passed it for most points per game as a Celtic, like average. He might pass that. He might be
And
getting over 30 points per game.
I know you spoke about the 50-point games and him surpassing Larry, but did you happen to mention that he tied Kobe as well? Did you mention that at the top of the show?
Yes. Yeah.
See, I'm just
Crazy. His idol,
It's
which
insane.
is
His
big.
idol. I genuinely believe that we're looking at. Someone put it on Twitter like he's the second coming of Christ. I'm like, I'm not going that far. Like, I'm not being disrespectful to religions here, but he's the second coming of the basketball gods. I'll tell you that much. Like, you don't see many talents like this, that, especially as a Celtics fan, where their drafting has been up and down. They definitely draft well. They've never drafted poorly. Well, I'd say never, but recently they haven't drafted poorly. But this is a player they traded down out of that first pick to acquire. You know, they could have gone for Markelle Fultz, could have gone for, it was Lonzo Ball at 2, Tatum at 3, if I remember correctly. They traded out of the first pick, knowing he'd still be there at 3, and he ended up being the best player in that draft. Like, he's like, that was like some foresight. I'm really, really impressed with the way they've drafted him, developed him, the work he's obviously put in, because we always say, oh, the team developed the player. Well, yeah, but that guy has probably sacrificed like everything in terms since he joined the league. You see a lot of guys come into the NBA with all the talent in the world, but their sacrifice isn't there. And that's been something Tatum's really been drilling in post-game press conferences lately. Guys have to sacrifice. Everybody has to make sacrifices for the good of the team. As far as I'm concerned, he's my favorite Celtic, arguably of all time at this point anyway. I grew up watching the Pierce era Celtics, didn't really see much Larry Bird. First few Celtics games I ever saw on TV had Bird in, but I grew up watching Pierce, and then I grew up on KG and Big Baby and all that. And then I grew up watching, and then, you know, as an adult, this is my favorite Celtics player of all time, is Jayson Tatum.
Yeah, hands down.
With that being said, we will be back tomorrow. We've actually put a new schedule together. I'm going to show it you quickly. It's my entire social media schedule, so butt out if you're not just looking at the YouTube. But as you can see, the YouTube one is hella full. So we've got this channel ready to go. We've actually finally put the work in and figured out how we want to run it. And we're not running it like, we've got some ideas. And I've got some things in the woodwork as well. So you will be seeing a lot more of us. We're happy that you came. We're happy that you enjoyed it. Leave a comment, get into a discourse with us, man. We want it. Tim will be back later. Me and you will be recording later for a tomorrow release anyway. Until then, top of the morning to you. See y'all later.
Cheers.